webinar about accessible fixed layout ebooks by our technology specialist, Emma Cote. We would like to begin today by acknowledging the land eBound's office is currently on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So throughout the presentation, I'll be monitoring the chat for any questions. We also have 2 question periods, which you can jump in as well. And we are recording a presentation and we will post this online afterwards. So I'll hand it over to you, Emma.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Can everyone give me a nod if you can hear me? Okay, I see a wave already, so that's perfect. Thanks so much. Okay, and please feel free to let me know if you need the volume up or down throughout. All the slides I'm happy to send along after the presentation, and I'm always happy to answer any additional lingering questions. So feel free to email me afterwards. So as we all know, accessible fixed layout is a little bit of an oxymoron just because of the nature of the format, but we're going to go through today all of the ways that you can make it accessible. But first, for anyone that doesn't know, a quick introduction on the eBound team. We always say we're small but mighty. We represent most of the Canadian independent publishers, and we are a not-for-profit. We operate with a few distinct pillars. So ebook creation, which we also call conversion, usually from the print PDF to an EPUB file, which includes reflowable EPUBs, web PDFs, and fixed layout, which is why we're doing the individual webinars. And then we also handle distribution and marketing for publishers. And what we're talking about today falls under this third pillar, which is education, research, and accessibility/advocacy. So with the launch of the EU, there's been a lot more work on this in this area. So we're hoping that these webinars will kind of give publishers a little bit of a leg up as things come into play. So as I think most of you know me, I recognize, I think, all of the names. I'm Emma. I've been with eBound for over 4 years now. I won't read out my bio here, but you can read it if you can read and listen at the same time. And like all of the other eBound staff members, we're all very passionate about accessibility, so happy to be involved in this world. The goals for this session today are really just to understand the accessible features in fixed layout EPUBs, which I will from henceforth be calling FL EPUB, and ideas for more accessible design. So I am going to get into sort of things that you can share with your graphic designer and your conversion partners as well, and give you some clarity on what to add in your specific ONIX metadata for your fixed layout EPUBs. So the full agenda, as it will be written out here, is we'll first review the design ideas, and then I figure there might be some questions about that, so we'll stop for a question period right after that. You'll see the slide there with questions on it. And of course, as Elizabeth said, feel free to lift your hand or put anything in the chat. She'll be monitoring the chat. And if it's a good discussion question, I'll just jump in. I don't mind kind of jumping in live to keep the conversation feeling a little bit more fluid. After that, we will review ways of assessing your fixed layout backlist. And we'll go over ONIX features that should be added for these EPUBs, and a step-by-step plan for moving forward, and then another question period. So lots of time to ask your questions and get them answered. So as I'm sure many of you know, the European Accessibility Act comes into play on June 28th, 2025. There's been a lot of questions regarding that. What we do know is that all reflowable EPUBs should, by this point, really be born accessible. So that terminology of born accessible was created, as far as I know, feel free to correct me if this is wrong, but was used in the Canadian legislation for all EPUBs to be created this way, meaning that you're thinking about accessibility from the very beginning. And the date for that was back in 2024. So this really should be on the press's radar, and even more so now with this June 28th date that is requiring EPUBs to be accessible or at least give the metadata. So as I've already mentioned, fixed layout and web PDFs, which we covered in the previous session, should be made as accessible as possible with the ONIX features listed in the metadata. So they can't be made fully accessible to the same standard as a reflowable EPUB simply because of the nature of the format. So really quickly, reflowable meaning that you can resize the text and the entire length of the document will change, right? So if you make the text smaller, it'll be fewer pages. If you make the text larger, it'll be more pages. You can't do that with a fixed layout title because the actual image, the layout is kind of adhered to the page. And it can get a little bit tricky with fixed layout. I don't know if anyone has explored what a fixed layout looks like on a e-reader with an ink screen, but they're tricky to navigate because you can zoom, but you can only zoom in sections and then move around. So with that being said, reflowable is still kind of what is industry standard because it's just more accessible by nature. You don't get stuck with that zoom and then trying to shift around on the page situation. So already kind of touched on this here. One thing that I do want to point out when it comes to fixed layout EPUBs, excuse me, is that you want to make sure that your conversion partner, so the person creating those EPUBs, is creating them as accessible as possible. And also make sure that they're charging accordingly. So a fixed layout EPUB can't be made fully accessible, but it can have those features added. And it's really important that you as a publisher learn what those features are and how they kind of interact with the file so that you know whether they've been added correctly or not. And just a note as well, so it's my understanding that we can't currently mark any fixed layout EPUB off as WCAG AA compliant simply because of that reflow issue. Okay, so this is a big question that I think is really important to ponder as publishers. And I think really this is the most simple and the best answer. So when should you start thinking about the accessibility of your book? Well, it shouldn't be from, from the creation of the EPUB only. It should be from the very, very beginning because we know that the layout of the text really affects the accessibility. And so it's really important that if you're reaching for born accessible content, that you're always opting for the reflowable EPUB whenever possible. It's kind of like a fixed layout is a last resort for things that really just can't be reflowable, things like children's books, certain books of poetry, depending on the specifics, and certain academic texts as well that might need images to show up exactly beside certain headings or texts or things like that. So one thing I really want to stress is that it's important to chat with authors, designers, editors from the very start, because especially with poetry and things that require specific layouts, it's really important that the author know that it's very possible that if they're really stuck on a specific layout, that might mean that the two options are not an accessible book, or if they're more interested in accessibility, that they might have to let go of the layout and design a little bit. So if that's part of the conversation from the beginning, it can really come as less of a shock to the author that, oh, this EPUB doesn't look exactly like the print version. So with that being said, the idea behind accessibility is that everyone gets the same book at the same time. Okay, that's true accessibility. But in order to make something accessible, sometimes we have to let go of exactly where certain things are placed. So, and I'll show you some examples of that a little bit later. Okay. So when it comes to accessible fixed layout design, I want to go over a few individual things that may or may not be things that your conversion house is doing automatically, but it's a really good idea to familiarize yourself with these terms and these options so that when you're conversing with that conversion partner, you know what to ask for. So when it comes to CSS styling, we want to and wanting to make sure that things appear at different points on the page. Um, you can kind of create different styles by doing something like this. So this is a book of poetry that I'm using with permission. And if I could get in the chat if whether people, just a yes or a no, whether everyone has experienced or used Sigil before, SGIL. I'll put that in the chat. So if you have used it, please do let me know. I'm not sure. Okay, use it frequently, not Nancy. Okay. So a few people from the chat, it looks like a few people have used it, a few people haven't. So again, this is another app that you can follow up with me afterwards if you'd like a little tutorial on how to use it. So essentially, this is an app that shows you on the right-hand side of the screen here, it will show you what the EPUB looks like to a reader. And then it'll also show you the back end code stuff going on so that you know how things are being designed. So essentially what's happening here is that the conversion partners have created a class, a styling system for each individual line. So poetry is very complex in the sense that if there is going to be a different organization of the words like this, where the poet really wants these particular lines to show up on the right of the reader's page, then we're going to need a different class system for those two lines. Okay, and so you can do different things like that. They've also made it italic here as well, and you can even space words out in the same way. The issue with poetry is it's often, I should say, so different by line. So you'll end up with quite a few of these class systems, but this is a really great way to style something and try to retain some of the formatting from the original file without having to go to fixed layout. So in the past, I think people would have automatically done fixed layout for something like this. But because this is styled line by line, it's actually being made reflowable. So I know this is a webinar on fixed layout, but again, I just want to reiterate that even when you think something might have to be fixed layout, it can possibly be made into reflowable. You have to take into consideration all of the work that would have to go into the back end to create the file that way. Okay. So I do have a short video here to go over another little thing about turning a fixed layout title into reflowable. So this is a video that will review a table of contents and some setup that can be done to organize the table of contents and the back end of the EPUB so that it stays reflowable.
Great example of a title that may have been made fixed layout in the past, but with some creativity in how things are organized, you can still make it reflowable. So this is a book of poetry by one of our publishers that I'm showing with permission. As you can see here is the table of contents, and it's split into kind of sections or parts that contain multiple poems. So if we go down to page 21, where this first poem starts, you can see that there's different formatting on the individual lines. And if we keep going, there's a title for each poem and it's on a separate page, but it's not technically a separate chapter. And there's a variety of different formats, in some cases in the center or over left, and in some cases further down, you'll see a couple lines that are styled over right. So when it comes to poetry, the organization of the words on the page are obviously very important to the author. So one really good way to do that is to create kind of sections and titles to organize them. So if we go to the table of contents, this is the internal table of contents. It's exactly the same as what it is in the print PDF, but essentially they've split up each section into an individual page for each poem. So it is a ton of work for the conversion partners, but doing it this way means that you can stylize each poem individually, using different paragraph classes for each line, and then stylizing other lines whichever way you want to. So they're all organized with this invisible title here, Seeds of the Rising Sun, poem 4. But what the reader will see is what's in the header, which is darkness and light.
So darkness and light right here is the H2 header that is being displayed. So in the print version, everything was split up into parts, but not really separated into chapters. And it looks a little different in the back end in the EPUB version where there's all these additional pages, but it means that it can still remain fully accessible, even with all of this individual formatting.
Great example.
Okay.
Great example.
All right, now I'm stuck in here.
Of title that.
Oh, sorry, one sec. Oh. Okay. Oh, I'm just gonna go out and in again to get back up to my full screen here. Okay. So when it comes to the fixed layout design, you still want to make sure that all images have that alternative text. And always opt to use images as background and lay text separately over top. So I'll show you what that looks like in a second here. You also want to, wherever you can, opt for single page layouts over 2-page spreads. So if you think about a textbook or a children's book, often you're not so much with academic texts, but with children's books, for instance, you're holding it up in front of the print version anyway, you're holding it up in front of a classroom or, a group of kids or for an individual. And so it's displaying across both pages sometimes because the image goes across both pages and maybe the text goes across both pages. But when it comes to the EPUB version, is it possible to split that image in two and retain the meaning of the image? Because if so, it's definitely a good idea because for the most part, EPUBs are being read. They're not being read on something that would be as big as the print version. They're being read on smaller screens. So trying to do 2-page spreads can really make it more inaccessible, especially for fixed layout, because it means that you're again doing that zoom in and scrolling across the image to try and find the words. Whereas if everything's on an individual page and maybe it means that image is split down the middle, but everything makes sense that way. So keeping that in mind when you're designing your textbooks or your children's books or anything that is in the print version, you're going to traditionally have a 2-page spread. Do you need that 2-page spread, or could it be split down the middle? So here's an example. Sorry, it's a bit blurry, but I had to make it up. So this is kind of when you would see that the designer has embedded the text in the image. And this can be an issue because a screen reader can't pull that text out if it's embedded in the image, right? So the better option is to do something like this, where this will still allow for the text to be changed and the spacing to be changed, and it's not embedded right in the image. It is put on top of the image. So wherever possible, using your images or your graphs or anything like that separate from the text is really the way to go. Again, just another note on the single page images. This version will likely be read by individuals. And images can be resized and split onto the individual pages, but they really can't be resized and split when you're reading on an e-reader or a screen device. So the other thing is there's this piece of metadata that sometimes gets left out. If you are opting for single page images, you really want to make sure this piece of metadata is in your EPUB. Okay, and so even though, you know, for instance, with a children's book, you don't usually see a full table of contents, but you still want to include one, even if it's not, you know, a traditional table of contents that you would see in a book like an academic text. So that could look something like this. So this is still really important because we need that table of contents for accessibility. And then the landmarks are also required, including this specific landmark here of start of content to distribute to Apple. So there's lots of specifics when it comes to fixed layout titles, and making sure that you include these accessibility features and then these different pieces of metadata inside the EPUB are really important. So if you're doing your conversions in-house, there's kind of a bit of a learning curve with trying to create as accessible as possible fixed layout titles. But if you are doing your conversions not in-house, you'll want to make sure that you're working with a certified partner who understands accessibility. So a little side note here, as we're talking about these potential issues, it's Apple that I often see fixed layout titles failing at. And these are just some of the common errors that I see that I thought I'd take a second to go over. So that start of content landmark is really, it's not just important, it's required for any fixed layout title going to Apple. So if you don't have a landmark, such as this one here, start of content, it will not distribute or process at Apple. So making sure that your conversion partners know to include that is really important. I often see, especially with children's books and academic texts and anything with because it's usually like coffee table books or something with really large images that ends up needing to be fixed layout. And so often the images come back as too large. If the images are too large, it won't distribute or process on Apple either. So make sure your conversion partners know that the images can't be larger than 3 million pixels. I often see, again, these are all Apple errors. The separate cover image for fixed layout titles will sometimes come back still as CMYK instead of RGB. That's a simple export fix. So just make sure that that's the case. And then I'll go over this metadata a little bit more in the next slides, but missing the pre-paginated metadata is often an issue at Apple. Oops. And missing that spread metadata that I just mentioned. So I'll show you that in a second here, but I wanted to just pause. No questions in the chat or anything, but I'll pause here in case anyone had any design questions or any specifics. We'll just give people a minute to think, just in case. I don't think I can actually see anyone typing on here or not, but.
So there is one question. Why use fixed layout over PDF? What are the advantages?
So I would say that fixed layout can still have more accessible features than a PDF. And generally speaking, the PDFs are way more expensive to make. So there's a cost difference there. And also PDF is not really required anymore. So unless you're distributing somewhere that requires a PDF, it's no longer the preferred format for most vendors. In fact, it's not even required by, I think, most of the vendors, unless you know that you have a market in academic vendors. So all of the academic vendors do still take them, but as far as we know from kind of the the reader data, it's not really the preferred format because most people are reading on either their phone or on an e-reader device, and a lot of the retail like Kobo and Amazon, they don't actually accept web PDF. So whereas all of the vendors do accept fixed layout EPUBs. So just in summary, I would say the cost is the benefit, as well as the just necessity of them. Okay. So as always, feel free to put any other questions in the chat, but I'll keep going for now. Okay, so you might be wondering if you just have a bunch of EPUBs stored on your computer or something like that, or they're not in CoreSource, or maybe you're worried that they've been uploaded to CoreSource incorrectly. There is a way to check for that pre-paginated marker. Now, again, this does depend on the conversion partner knowing what they're doing and having included this metadata. But this is a way of checking to see whether an EPUB is fixed layout or not. So you would just open it in Sigil and then look for the OPF file and then check for in red here where I have, it'll say pre-paginated, which means that it's fixed layout, versus pagination means that it's reflowable. So that's a little bit of terminology that you can try and memorize if you're ever looking in, need to figure out if something is fixed layout or not. So it looks like this in Sigil, which again is showing all of that backend HTML code stuff. And so the OPF file is usually at the bottom here. And then you would look for meta property rendition layout. So pre-paginated means that it is fixed layout. And if we look here too, I can see the rendition spread both means that this is on a 2-page spread. Okay, so this is doing the thing that I said not to do. If it said rendition spread none, that would mean that it is on a single page spread. Okay. So how to find features in your fixed layout EPUB. I think most people are familiar with Ace by Daisy. Again, you can follow up after this if you need links or any help running these applications. So this is just a way to easily see the alt text that might be added to your EPUB and check the metadata tab for any features. So again, that is running the separate Ace by Daisy app, and it will show you if the metadata features have been added to the EPUB and your conversion partner is a trusted partner and you know that they have properly, like you trust them to properly add all of the different features. I will just note here that if you're running Ace by Daisy with a fixed layout EPUB, it won't pull in the violations. So you kind of have to ignore the violations tab and only focus on the metadata and the alt text. So as I did in my previous web PDF webinar, this is kind of if there's a main slide takeaway, this is kind of it. You can screenshot this if you want to pass it along to whoever does your metadata, but these are the main features that you would add to your ONIX for fixed layout titles. And I'm going to go over all of them individually as well. So essentially, the accessible summary, these are all from code list 196, of course. So the summary should be human readable language that explains features in documents and any deficiencies. So for fixed layout EPUBs, you could copy this verbatim if you want to, or you can do something that you think fits a little bit better. But essentially, you don't want to list out all of the features that you're about to put in the metadata individually. You just want to make like a human readable quick summary so that if someone with a print disability depends on the summary to understand what's in the book, they can just read this rather than trying to scroll through everything. So you do want to just mention that due to the nature of fixed layout EPUBs, this version doesn't pass WCAG AA, but it has been made as accessible as possible. This is also where you could add that, if this is a math textbook, that you've included Math ML and things like that. The next one is table of contents. So again, same as reflowable, and even if it's a fixed layout, you want to add those table of contents in. It might look a little bit different on an end user device on an e-reader. The table of contents for fixed layout titles does not look the same, and you have to click in a different spot. So I always try and tell people that as well, that it's just going to operate so differently on all devices compared to a reflowable. But that's okay. We just need to know that the table of contents is there and that it's been done properly. Single logical reading order. So all of these are the same as web PDF and reflowable. Any fixed layout EPUB with a table of contents should also have this, but you can confirm inside ACE. And so inside ACE, when you look at the outline, you'll be able to see that there's a single logical reading order as the headings will kind of cascade down. So all that's telling you is that the headings have been used properly and that any backlinks, for example, if you have footnotes, when there's a footnote and you click on the number for the footnote and it takes you to a separate screen, that you can easily click and go back. So essentially a person with print disabilities isn't going to get lost inside your EPUB because there's only one way to move through it, including those backlinks. This one, sometimes people do get a little bit confused with. So these are the either short or full alternative descriptions. Full would only be used for if you needed extended descriptions. So for instance, if there was a really complex chart or graph or something like that, where you needed to have an extended version where if someone had to really understand that chart and graph, on a really deep level, that they could go to an extended version to understand it better. So that would be when you would use full. Otherwise, you're using short, which I always say should just be normal alternative descriptions. Print equivalent page numbering should also be included. So your conversion partner will look at your print PDF and they'll mark in the fixed layout EPUB everywhere that a page break happens in the print layout, because that tells someone who's using the final fixed layout EPUB that they can go to a certain page if other people are using it. So really, really important to include those for things like academic texts as well, because in a classroom setting, if most people, all the sighted people have the physical version, but perhaps a person with print disabilities has a digital version, they need those page breaks and those page numbers along with a page list so that they can go to the right spot and they can stay on task with the rest of the class. Language tagging is only for, well, it can be for both, sorry. So it's for the main language as well as any shifts in language. So perhaps the book is in English, but there's a few phrases or words that are in another language. Like French, for example, anything that is in French would need to be tagged as a language shift. And again, your conversion partner will know how to do all of these, but it's just really good for you to be familiar with it so you can take a look. So for instance, if you know that you have a book that shifts back and forth from English to French, then you can open it up in something like Sigil and you can check to see if those language tags are there. Use of contrast. This is another thing that you'll want to do outside of the EPUB. So you can scroll through the document and see if anything is hard to read. You can see if, here, this is a great example. So the color contraster that I'll show in the next slide shows whether you can see a difference between the background and the foreground. So depending on your eyesight, this this bottom one might be a little bit more difficult to read. So the background here is a high contrast, it's acceptable, but this lower one here, because the gray is so close to the white, it's an issue. So this is the color contraster. I showed a different one last time. That was a Chrome extension, but I thought I'd show this one this time because this is an app that you can download. I'll show in the next image what it looks like, but essentially you are using the eyedropper tool and you're eyedropping the foreground and then you're eyedropping the background, and it will look at those two colors and say, is the contrast high enough? So, and then down here we have the ratio. So the ratio that's required, I mean, it's 1.6, but you don't really have to remember that. You can just look at the text and large text here. So what we're aiming for with WCAG compliance and with EAA compliance is the AA. So AAA is, you know, that's not industry standard at this point. If you want to try and make everything AAA compliant, you absolutely can, but that'll be an additional amount of work. Right now for EAA and industry-wide, you just need AA. So what it's talking about with the text size here is regular text. So meaning the regular pages. If you were using the gray background and the white text on just your regular pages, this would fail, but it would also fail if you were using that on your cover. So large text is referring to like big headings or your cover, and then just text is referring to your regular text. And this is what it looks like in my app store. I'm on a Mac, so it might look a little bit different for you. But this is the one that if it mentions WCAG, that is really what you want to be looking for. And if it mentions EAA. And I do see a question in the chat here, so I'm just gonna read it out and I will answer it. So Sergey, it says, if the EPUB has language shifts in the text, should the OPF file DC language list all these languages, or is this metadata element only for specifying the main language of the book? Yeah, so the main language is the only one that you want specified in the DC language element. The other, unfortunately, you can't, in an ONIX feed, you can specify that an EPUB is in multiple languages, but very unfortunately, you can't specify that in core source. So your options are, you can put that the language is multiple, but that might not be processed properly at a vendor, and your title might not be pushed to the right user audiences if you put it in that way. So the unfortunate thing is you just have to pick kind of a main language and then treat everything else as language shifts. So you can do it on each page, but you just can declare a single language in the DC element in the EPUB, unfortunately. Okay, and the next one is the next previous navigation. All EPUBs kind of naturally have this. Again, this is that proper hierarchy of headings so that you can go back and forth in the in the EPUB, and anything with a working table of contents has this as well. So links and backlinks. And then link purpose clear is essentially just this. It is a good idea to put something like publisher website in front of the URL, because essentially what a screen reader is going to do is it's going to read out the entire URL. So if the person with a print disability hears publisher website, they know that that's what's coming and they can skip over it, as opposed to just realizing, you know, halfway through this. So the whole thing is about just making the document flow better. Okay. So the next thing is just where can you put this accessible metadata for your fixed layout EPUBs? So last time I went over Book Connect, but I don't know how many people are Book Connect clients. And unfortunately, it's different in every UI for different ONIX providers. So I am just going to go over a couple of things in the spreadsheet live here with you. And show you some screenshots of what it looks like in CoreSource. So if you are still needing and only willing to do your metadata updates right in CoreSource, this is what it looks like. You just need to search the ISBN and then click edit and scroll down to the main screen, and it will show you this product form features area. And then it is a bit of a manual effort. You do have to put in that 09 ePublication accessibility detail and then add in the value. So these are all from code, all the values here are from code list 9196. And again, just as a reminder, this will be the only, the OO accessibility summary will be the only one that is a flexible field, meaning you can type into it. And this is again where you can put that template of what I put in the previous slide. Okay, so this is what it looks like in the CoreSource spreadsheet. And I am just going to share my another screen with you here to go over the actual a couple little things in the spreadsheet for you. Okay. So it should open to this screen here. So I know that a lot of people are not a fan of the CoreSource spreadsheet. It's clunky and cumbersome and long, but if you are in the kind of thick of it with trying to add a bunch of accessibility metadata at a time, and you don't have a spreadsheet that you can add to your ONIX provider, this is a great efficient way to add the accessibility metadata for multiple titles. So after you've done those checks, you can add in the accessibility metadata here. And I've saved this as a template, so I can send this out to anyone who would like it after the presentation. This is essentially, you only need to put in these first 3 columns, followed by the accessibility information for any EPUB you want to update. So you don't have to have all of the other info, and it won't overwrite anything. It's just going to add the accessibility metadata. So just as a reminder, the reason there's multiple rows here is because each row represents a price. So all the rows here from 3 to 11 are all for the same book. And we don't want to mess with that because we want to leave it as is so that just the accessibility metadata is being added to each existing price. So I'm just scrolling to the right. But I do know that the accessibility metadata starts in column GI. So I'm scrolling, but you can also grab the bar down here and go over to GI. Okay, and essentially all you need to change is anything in here. So I've already got them all filled out for you. And the reason that this is highlighted in yellow is because this is the only flex field, the only cell that you need to change. I already got what I had in the template there for the fixed layout EPUB, but you can change this if you want to make it your own. You just don't want it to be too much longer than it is here. So same kind of concept for alt text writing, where you don't want things to be too much longer than 250 characters, because then you're just sort of making anyone listen to something for a really long time to figure out if it has what they need. So you do want to try and be succinct and to the point, not overly verbose as we were trained. So all you're doing is either updating this if you want to change the wording, and then making sure that there aren't any additional ones that you need. The spreadsheet's a little bit confusing because it shows this extra description, but that's just because of the way the spreadsheet's set up. When something says repeatable, it means that you can add in additional columns, but you have to add in both. So say you also wanted to add in math content, you can go over here and add in those 2 other columns, but you have to put them both in. But again, that first summary is the only one that actually makes use of the description. So I don't know if that's clear or if that seems really strange. Essentially, this is the feature and then this is the description that goes with it, but only this one can have a description. And I've already got all of the features in this spreadsheet that I mentioned in that one slide. So should you want to use this to update all of or some of or a batch of your accessible or fixed layout titles at the same time, you can do that. You just want to make sure that when you're downloading the information that you're putting as many lines as there are prices. So that might need a little bit more review in practice, but essentially if you do want to add multiple titles, you can just scroll back over to the beginning of the spreadsheet, and then you can copy down all of those rows into another one. And what I do to just make sure that I know where there is a divide between the titles is I'll just add a line. So I know that this is a new title here. And obviously this would be a different ISBN. So say we got them around the same time, but so this is a different ISBN for a different title, and it's copying down. If it's too confusing to just use ISBNs, so again, this would be a different one. If it's too confusing to just use ISBNs, you can also add the title, which is right here. So that might be helpful to keep it organized, but again, you can't move any of these columns around. So that's why I say if you can manage to just work with the ISBNs and you know that those are the ones that need accessibility information added, then that is a good way to do it. And of course, the last step here would be that you need to change this over to EPUB fixed. And just a quick note here, it doesn't matter if you do EPUB fixed or EPUB 3 fixed in the sense of what's being sent, but you do need to have the same as what's already in CoreSource. So if your EPUBs are uploaded as EPUB fixed rather than EPUB 3 fixed, you want to just keep with that, because that will also mean that your channels are already set up to send that asset type. It's the same asset type. It's just when things were switching over from 2 to 3, it became a distinction that needed to be made. But now the distinction is just assumed. So either or is fine. So yeah, you're just updating those columns, and again, you're copying over as many titles as you need to. So I've got 2 titles here now, and if I scroll back over to GI, then I've copied all of the accessibility info again. So it's really good to work in batches so you can, after you've checked the fixed layout titles, you can then add the accessibility metadata afterwards when you feel confident that those features are there and you know what you're looking for. So a quick review of the process that we would need to go through for the assessing your backlist titles specifically. So unfortunately, it's still kind of a scenario where you have to go title by title. So download the EPUB, check for that. The first thing that you can do is check for that pre-paginated mark in Sigil, and then run an accessibility report in ACE to get the metadata and make sure that the alt text is there. And then after you feel confident that all of the features are there, you can update the metadata and resend your metadata to all vendors. So it is a fairly high touch process for backlist, but moving forward for front list, you should be able to just kind of communicate that you need all these features included and feel confident when you're creating your ONIX records or your metadata or in your CoreSource that you can always add those features. So there's kind of the process of assessing the backlist and then ensuring that the front list always has those features if you absolutely need to do a fixed layout title. So of course, just to review again, we always want to drive home the message that accessible books are just better books for everyone. Whenever you see an EPUB glitching out on certain e-readers or devices, it's usually because they are missing some of these headings or features or things that are required to make an ebook process properly. So accessible books are just better books, and it also opens up a larger market. And then not to mention, if you have these features in your book, but you don't know and you're not communicating them, you could miss out on sales because people might depend on that metadata, that summary or something like that to to assess whether or not they're going to purchase. You really want to make sure that you're adding this to your workflow and ensure that the conversion partners you're working with are certified. When you do order your EPUBs, your fixed layout EPUBs, make sure that you're saying, using the terminology of, can you make this as accessible as possible? You can give them a screenshot of that list of all of the different features and say, make sure that these are added. And now you know how to kind of do some QA and check that they're there as well. And again, if I haven't said it enough, opt for refillable whenever possible. Even if that means kind of sacrificing a little bit of the design. And really important to chat with authors about that concept of letting go a little bit of the EPUB version being an exact replica of the print version. And of course, if you have a large backlist that you just aren't sure if it's accessible, or if you have fixed layout EPUBs that you want created, you can always do them through eBound. This is the contact for small batch conversions, and you would just have to fill out a request for quote template, and then we will get those quotes over to you at no obligation. Thank you so much for attending, and I hope that this has been helpful.